Military tech evolved at an incredibly rapid pace during the mid-20th century, faster than any other period before or since. Things like missiles, jet aircraft, and nuclear weapons. But that progress seems to have come to a halt recently. From 1940 to 1980, we went from propeller-driven airplanes, virtually no missiles, be it surface-to-air, cruise, or ballistic, and really no methods of guidance. Radar was extremely primitive, no nuclear weapons, and no stealth, to having all of that by 1980, in just a 40-year period. But in the 40 years since, tech seems to have remained the same. The fastest aircraft, the highest flying jet, even all human spaceflight outside of Earth orbit all took place during that period, and have not been repeated or surpassed since. Why is this? What happened? This video is sponsored by Swagbucks. It's a great way to earn some extra cash, or even gift cards for places like Amazon, Walmart, and more. You earn this by doing things like playing video games, taking surveys, watching videos, or just even shopping online, and all from home. Give it a try, it's easy. I've actually had an account with them since before even starting Covert Cabal. Go click on the link down in the description to get started, and with it, you'll get an extra $5 when you take your first survey. And finally, thanks again to Swagbucks for sponsoring this video. The 20th century in general was a remarkable period. At the beginning, we were stuck on the ground, except for a few balloons. By the end, we had left Earth, landed, and walked on the moon. But even that was accomplished long before the end of the century, and since then we haven't returned. It seems something happened that got in the way. While aircraft are certainly better than that of the 1980s, they are basically still the same. Most aircraft operational today were in fact designed back then. The most famous fighters operational today, like the American F-15, F-16, F-A-18, and Russian aircraft like the MiG-29 and Su-27 had all been designed and first flown before 1980. We consider these fourth-generation jet aircraft. We went through 4 complete generations in that relatively short period from World War II to 1980, and we're still there today. 4th-gen aircraft are still by far the most widely operated, much more so than the latest 5th-gen. But this can also be said about other weapon systems as well. The US, for example, who like to claim to possess the latest and most advanced military hardware, the M1 Abrams tank still used today was designed in the early 70s. Patriot design was started at the end of the 60s. The Nimitz-class supercarriers, all of which are still in service, were designed in the 1960s as well, with the first 3 being built before 1980. Even the Apache attack helicopter was designed and first took flight in 1975. The main ICBM the US uses for deterrence to this day, the Minuteman III, entered service in 1970. That's 50 years ago. And this is true with many other nations as well. It would almost seem that technology froze in place, with only a few minor upgrades being made over the 40 years since. It's even possible that in a hypothetical battle, the US military from the 1980s could win a war against the current US military, being that a lot of the gear is the same, and there was a lot more of it back in the 80s. Maybe we can get Binkoff to make a video on that and find out. But books and movies depicted the 21st century to be full of spaceships, phasers, laser weapons, and all sorts of high-tech equipment, as they believed things would continue to advance at the rate they had been. Movies like the 1982 Blade Runner, which is set in the year 2019, Alien Intruder, set in 2022, or 2001 A Space Odyssey, which was released in the late 60s, all show this. After the moon landings in the late 60s and early 70s, people thought we would colonize the moon by the 80s, be on Mars by the 90s, and out deeper into the solar system by 2000. None of this happened. One good reason to explain this was the end of the Cold War. Defense spending across the world shrunk, and investment in designing new weapons went to nearly zero when the Soviet Union collapsed. There was no need to continue spending so much money for newer and more powerful weapons when there was no enemy left to compete with. China is really the one who appears to be changing things now, which in turn is beginning to force other countries to do so as well. We are now seeing things like hypersonics, laser weapons, and railguns be developed, and possibly even the beginning of a new space race. Many nations across the world are now seriously investing into their military again, with things like 5th gen and even 6th generation aircraft. Countries like Japan, Pakistan, Turkey, and many more have announced plans for 5th gen, and just recently, the US announced it had already built and flown a full-scale prototype of a 6th gen fighter. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that this increase in defense spending is a good thing or a bad thing. There are some valid arguments to be made on each side, like concerns about the military-industrial complex when you spend more on defense, along with the perceived greater risk of war. And on the other side, there are valid arguments as well, such as defense spending can create incredible new technologies for the civilian sector, such as GPS and the internet. Which brings up the final point. Military technology, and that of civilian use, hasn't frozen at all. it just became invisible. You can look at a tank or aircraft or submarine from World War II, and then its counterpart from the 1980s and see a very, very clear advancement. They look nothing alike. But if you do the same with a vehicle from the 1980s to the year 2020, it's not as clear. That's because most of the advancement is digital. So many of the innovations made in the last 40 years come in the form of computers, processing power, and autonomy. For example, the Tomahawk cruise missile, which first became operational in 1983, looks visibly the exact same as the latest version, but it's virtually not even the same missile. The original one failed regularly due to its relatively primitive navigation system, could not be controlled remotely, and could take hours, even days to load a missile with the target and flight path. Now it could do all that, have a flight plan loaded, and be ready to fire in minutes, even send back data to command, including pictures, loiter over an area and wait for a target to emerge, and be redirected in flight. Data links between aircraft can transmit incredible amounts of information, enabling a level of situational awareness only dreamed about in the 1980s. And on top of this digital technological revolution, developed since the 80s, has created an entire new domain in which to fight, the cyber domain. And this has changed everything. Even when no declaration of war has been announced, nations are fighting each other in this domain. They hack, steal data, gather intelligence, even plant digital bombs which can be used in the event of a war to sabotage the other's ability to fight across all the domains. Russia does it, China does it, the US does it, along with other countries. And this is all invisible. You can't see it. It's digital ones and zeros stored in memory on computers across the world, traveling through the air in the form of radio waves. And while you can't see it, it's arguably the most critical domain today, and will continue to grow in importance. Sitting behind a computer thousands of kilometers away, a person could create absolutely devastating effects, shutting down communications, the power grid, all commerce, and all you need is just an internet connection. This is something that in the past would require hundreds of bombers dropping thousands of bombs. So it's not that technology has stopped, it's just evolved in a way we never imagined. Science fiction showed us incredible laser weapons on massive spaceships that flew out into the solar system. But instead, we've advanced inward. It got smaller, it became invisible, which makes you wonder what will come in another 40 years. Will we be on Mars? Or could it one day get to a point where the physical world doesn't matter anymore, and we ourselves become digital?